Over 30 million people cruise annually, but cruise lines bury thousands of incidents that never make headlines. Tonight, 7 witnesses break their silence. Welcome to Mr. Nightveil, where these accounts come directly from those who lived through them. Only names, locations, and identifying details have been altered to protect privacy. These cruise ship incidents were so disturbing, companies erased them completely. Can you handle what happened in international waters where laws don't apply? Drop your location and current time in the comments below. If this sends chills down your spine, smash that subscribe button. Let's begin. My name is Madeline. I'm a marketing consultant from Denver, and 3 years ago, I did something I'd been putting off for way too long. I booked a solo Caribbean cruise. 7 nights, leaving from Miami on one of those massive ships you see in commercials with the rock-climbing walls and water slides. I needed the break. My cabin was 9347, a standard balcony room on deck 9, starboard side. Nothing fancy, but it had that little outdoor space where I could drink my morning coffee and watch the ocean. The cabin next to mine, 9349, had a couple staying there. I'd seen them during embarkation at the port of Miami. They looked to be in their mid-60s, the kind of people who probably cruise twice a year. The husband wore one of those tropical print shirts, and the wife had a sun hat with a ribbon. They smiled and waved when we passed each other in the narrow passageway on the first day. That's the thing about cruise ships. The walls are thin, the cabins are close, and you become inadvertently familiar with your neighbors, whether you want to or not. The first 2 nights were perfect. I fell asleep to the gentle rocking of the ship, that white noise of the ocean that people pay good money to stream on apps. We'd stopped in Cozumel on day 3, and I'd spent the afternoon snorkeling and exploring the shops near the port. I got back to the ship around 5, showered off the salt water, and had dinner alone at one of the casual restaurants on the Lido deck. By 11, I was in bed, reading on my tablet. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone, annoyed that something had pulled me out of sleep. At first, I thought it was the ship's motion. Sometimes when you're sailing through certain currents, you feel it more. But then, I heard voices through the wall. Not arguing, not the television, urgent whispering. The couple next door was awake, and whatever they were discussing, it wasn't casual middle-of-the-night conversation. I couldn't make out words, but I could hear the tone. Stressed, maybe frightened. The woman's voice went higher, the way voices do when someone's trying to stay quiet but can't control their panic. Then the man's voice, lower, trying to calm her or maybe convince her of something. I sat up in bed, listening. The whispering continued for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Then it stopped. Complete silence. I was about to lie back down when I heard their balcony door slide open. That distinct sound of the heavy glass door rolling on its track. Then the rush of ocean wind and ambient ship noise that gets louder when the seal breaks. I got out of bed and moved closer to my own balcony door. Through the thin divider that separates balconies, I could hear movement. Footsteps. The scraping sound of furniture being moved. Then nothing. Just the wind and the distant hum of the ship's engines. Their balcony door slid shut. Silence again. I stood there in the dark for a long time, listening. Part of me wanted to go out on my own balcony and look, but something stopped me. Some instinct that said whatever just happened wasn't my business, or maybe that it wasn't safe to witness. Instead, I got back in bed and lay there with my eyes open until the sun started coming up around 6. But here's what I didn't know then. What happened on that balcony would haunt me for years, and the cruise line would pretend it never happened at all. The next morning, I went up to the breakfast buffet on deck 10 around 8. The ship was sailing toward Grand Cayman, and the weather was beautiful. Clear skies, calm seas. I got my omelet and found a table by the window. That's when I saw her. The wife from cabin 9349 was sitting alone 3 tables away. She had a plate in front of her, untouched, a mug of coffee getting cold. Her eyes were red and puffy, but she wasn't actively crying anymore. She was just staring at that plate like it was the only thing in the world. Her sun hat was gone. Her hair looked uncombed. She wore the same clothes I'd seen her in the day before. I thought about going over, asking if she was okay. But what would I say? Hey, I heard you whispering through the wall at 3 in the morning. So I didn't. I finished my breakfast and left, and I felt guilty about it. That afternoon, I came back to my cabin around 2 to change for the pool. As I was unlocking my door, I noticed activity next door. 2 men in white polo shirts with radio earpieces were coming out of cabin 9349. Security personnel. I recognized the uniform from the muster drill. They weren't rushing, but they weren't casual either. They had that purposeful walk that security has when something's wrong, but they're trying not to alarm anyone. Behind them, a woman in a ship officer's uniform, white with gold trim, was talking quietly to the wife. The wife was nodding, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. The officer had her hand on the woman's shoulder in that practiced way people do when they're delivering bad news gently. I went into my cabin quickly, not wanting to be caught staring. But I couldn't help it. I left my door cracked and listened. I heard the officer say something about protocol and standard procedure and "We're doing everything we can." The wife's voice was too quiet to hear, but she sounded broken. They left. The passageway went quiet. I waited 5 minutes, then opened my door and looked. The wife was gone. Cabin 9349's door was closed. Everything looked normal, except it wasn't. That evening, I went out on my balcony around sunset. I don't know what made me do it. Morbid curiosity, maybe, or genuine concern. I looked over at the divider between our balconies. From my angle, I could just barely see into their space. The furniture had been rearranged. The 2 deck chairs that are standard in every balcony cabin had been pushed up against the railing, facing inward instead of out toward the ocean. One of them was turned on its side. The small table was moved to the far corner. It looked like someone had been trying to reach something or climb something or... I didn't want to think about what it looked like. The ocean doesn't care about your vacation. It doesn't care about your plans or your safety or whether you make it home. And cruise lines know this. They just hope you'll forget it. I didn't see the wife again for the rest of the cruise. Not in the dining rooms, not at the shows, not by the pools. It was like she'd vanished too. On day 5, I was coming back from a port stop in Jamaica, and I ran into my cabin steward in the passageway. His name was Rodrigo, from the Philippines. He'd been cleaning my room every day, always polite, always efficient. I asked him casually, trying to sound like I was just making conversation. "Hey, is everything okay next door? I haven't seen the couple from 9349 in a while." The change in his expression was immediate. His face went carefully blank, and he looked down the passageway both ways, like he was checking for someone. Then he looked at me and said in his accented English, "Guest disembarked early. Family emergency." "Disembarked," I said. "We're in the middle of the ocean." He nodded, already moving away with his cleaning cart. "Yes, miss. Early disembark. Very sorry. I must go." He practically fled down the passageway. I stood there thinking about what he'd said. We were at sea. The next port wasn't until the following morning. How does someone disembark in the middle of the ocean? Helicopter? Coast Guard? And if it was a family emergency serious enough for that kind of extraction, why did I hear them whispering on the balcony at 3 in the morning 2 nights before? Nothing made sense. On the last night of the cruise, the night before we returned to Miami, I went to guest services on Deck 5. I told the woman behind the desk that I'd been in cabin 9347 and I was concerned about my neighbors. I said I'd heard something that night and I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. She typed on her computer for a moment, then looked up at me with a practiced smile. I don't show any incident reports for that cabin, ma'am. Is there something specific we can help you with regarding your own accommodation? No, cabin 9349, I said. The couple who... I show that cabin was vacant for the majority of the sailing. She interrupted smoothly. Perhaps you're thinking of a different cabin number? I stared at her. It wasn't vacant. There was a couple staying there. I saw them. I saw security going in there. Her smile never wavered. Our records show cabin 9349 was unoccupied after day 1 due to a booking cancellation. Is there anything else I can assist you with this evening? I walked away. There was no point arguing with someone reading from a script. When I got home to Denver, I tried to find information online. I searched for cruise disappearances, missing passengers, incidents on that specific ship during that week. Nothing. I called the cruise line's customer service and was transferred 4 times before someone told me they couldn't discuss other guests' information due to privacy policies. I let it go eventually. What else could I do? But sometimes, late at night, I still think about that sound. The balcony door sliding open at 2:47 a.m., the scraping of furniture, the silence that followed. I think about the wife sitting in the breakfast buffet with dead eyes, staring at a plate she couldn't eat. I think about the security personnel and the rearranged furniture and the cabin steward who wouldn't look at me. Most of all, I think about the fact that according to the ship's records, none of it ever happened. Cabin 9349 was empty. No couple, no incident, no husband who disappeared somewhere between Cozumel and Grand Cayman while the rest of us slept. The ocean is deep, and it keeps secrets better than any cruise line ever could. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And I know that whatever happened on that balcony, someone decided it was better if it simply ceased to exist. My name is Samuel. I'm a marine engineer, and for 3 years I worked on one of the largest cruise ships operating Mediterranean routes. The kind of vessel that carries 4,000 passengers and crew, 11 passenger decks, and enough machinery below the waterline to power a small city. Most passengers never think about what's happening beneath their feet while they're sipping cocktails by the pool or watching shows in the theater. They don't know about the engine rooms, the generator spaces, the miles of corridors and equipment that keep everything running. That's where people like me spend our days and nights, in the belly of the ship where the real work happens. I'd always been fascinated by how things work. Engines, turbines, hydraulic systems. After getting my marine engineering certification in Southampton, I signed on with the cruise line and never looked back. The pay was good. I got to see ports all over the Mediterranean, and I genuinely enjoyed the work. There's something satisfying about maintaining machinery that massive, keeping it all synchronized and operational. Night shifts were standard rotation. Every engineer did them. You'd work from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., monitoring systems, performing routine checks, responding to any issues that came up. On a ship that size, something always needed attention. A pump making unusual noise, a pressure reading slightly off, a backup generator that needed testing. You learn to move through those lower deck spaces in the dark, navigating by memory and the dim emergency lighting that ran along the floors. This particular incident happened on my 5th night of a 7-day cruise from Barcelona to Athens. We'd stopped in Marseille, Monaco, and Naples already, and we were sailing overnight toward Sicily. The ship would dock in Palermo the next morning. It was late May, and the Mediterranean was calm, one of those perfect sailing nights where you barely felt the ship's motion. I came on shift at 11 p.m. My supervisor that night was the second engineer, a guy from Norway who'd been at sea for 20 years. He gave me my assignments. Routine maintenance check on the aft engine room equipment, specifically the auxiliary cooling system in section C7. Nothing complicated. Standard procedure we did twice a week. I grabbed my tablet with the maintenance checklist, my tools, and headed down. From deck 2, where the main engine control room was located, you had to go through 2 watertight doors and down a metal staircase to reach the aft engine spaces. The deeper you went, the louder it got. The constant thrum of engines, the whoosh of ventilation, the hiss of hydraulics. You wore ear protection, but you still felt it in your chest, that vibration that became part of your baseline after a while. I reached section C7 at 11:30 p.m. It was a narrow corridor lined with pipes, valves, and monitoring equipment. The cooling system panels were along the port side, accessible through a series of access hatches. I'd been in this exact spot dozens of times. I knew every gauge, every connection point. I started my checklist. Temperature readings, pressure levels, flow rates, everything looked normal. I opened the first access panel to visually inspect the coolant lines. That's when I noticed the temperature. It was cold. Not just cool from the air conditioning. Cold. The kind of cold that doesn't make sense in an engine room where ambient temperature is usually 25 to 30 degrees Celsius from all the running machinery. My breath came out in a visible puff. I looked at my tablet. The temperature sensor for this section read 28 degrees. But I was standing there in my short-sleeved work uniform, and I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms. Something was wrong with the sensor. Had to be. I made a note to replace it and continued with my inspection. That's when the lights flickered. Just for a second. The overhead fluorescence dimmed, then came back. In a space like that, with backup power systems and redundant circuits, lights don't just flicker. I stopped what I was doing and looked around. Everything seemed normal. The engine noise continued unchanged. Equipment hummed along. But that cold, it was getting worse. In the depths of a cruise ship, thousands of tons of steel between you and the surface. There are places where the machinery sounds almost alive. And sometimes, you're not sure if it's the machines you're hearing. I moved further down the corridor to check the next coolant panel. The lighting seemed dimmer here, or maybe it was just my imagination. The cold was intense now, like walking into a freezer. I could see my breath with every exhale. This wasn't a faulty sensor. This was real, and it made no physical sense. I was about to radio the control room when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Underneath the constant noise of machinery, something else. A rhythmic clanging, metal on metal, coming from the ventilation access corridor about 20 meters ahead. That corridor ran perpendicular to where I was standing, branching off into the ship's HVAC distribution system. I walked toward it slowly. Every instinct told me to turn around, go back to the control room, report the temperature anomaly, and let someone else investigate. But engineers are trained to check things out, to find the source of unusual sounds or readings. So I kept walking. The clanging stopped. I reached the entrance to the ventilation corridor. It was darker here, only every third light was on. per standard practice in secondary access areas to save power. The corridor stretched about 40 meters before turning sharply to starboard. Massive air ducts ran along the ceiling, with smaller pipes and electrical conduits lining the walls. The temperature here was even colder. I was shivering now. I turned on the flashlight attached to my tablet and shined it down the corridor. That's when I saw the shadow. It was at the far end, just before this turn, not a normal shadow cast by equipment or pipes. This was different. It had dimension, depth. It looked almost human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, with proportions that didn't quite match. It was standing there, motionless. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light. But when I opened my eyes, it was still there. And then it moved, not walked, moved. It shifted position without transition, like frames had been cut from a film. One moment it was at the far end. The next moment it was 10 meters closer. I hadn't seen it move. It just was suddenly in a different place. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the engine noise. I took a step backward. The shadow moved again. Closer. It was maybe 15 meters away now. I could see, or thought I could see, that it didn't quite touch the floor. It hovered just slightly above the deck plates. I turned and ran. I don't care how that sounds. I'm not ashamed to say it. I dropped my tablet, I dropped my tools, and I ran back through section C7, up the metal staircase, through both watertight doors, until I burst into the main engine control room where 3 other engineers were monitoring systems. The second engineer looked up, startled. What happened? I was breathing hard, trying to form words. Section C7, the aft cooling system corridor. Something's wrong. The temperature dropped, and I saw what? I couldn't say it. How do you tell your supervisor you saw a shadow that moved on its own? That you felt a cold that defied every law of thermodynamics in an engine room? Equipment malfunction, I finally said. Major temperature anomaly. The whole section is freezing. He frowned and checked his monitors. I'm not showing any alerts from that area. Temperature reads normal. It's not normal. I was just there. It's cold enough to see your breath. He looked at me for a long moment, then called over another engineer. Go with him. Check section C7, full diagnostic. The other engineer, a younger guy from India, grabbed a tablet and we headed back down. I didn't want to go. Every part of me was screaming not to go back there. But I couldn't refuse without explaining why, and I couldn't explain why. We went through the watertight doors, down the staircase. As we approached section C7, I braced myself for that cold. But the temperature was normal, warm even. The corridor looked exactly as it always did. Well lit, equipment humming, everything functioning. The ocean keeps secrets. The machinery keeps secrets. And sometimes, the ship itself keeps the biggest secrets of all. We walked to the ventilation corridor entrance. I shined my light down it. Empty. Nothing but pipes and ducts and shadows that made perfect sense based on the light sources. The other engineer did his diagnostic check. Everything read normal. Looks fine to me, he said. You sure about this? I picked up my tablet and tools from where I'd dropped them. Yeah, I'm sure. It was freezing here 20 minutes ago. He gave me a skeptical look, but didn't push it. We finished the maintenance checklist together and returned to the control room. I filed my report. Temperature anomaly, possible sensor malfunction, area checked and cleared. The second engineer made a note to have the sensors recalibrated. I didn't mention the shadow. My shift ended at 8 a.m. I went to my cabin on deck 1, crew quarters, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen. Maybe I'd been working too many night shifts. Maybe the constant engine noise and vibration did something to your perception after a while. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. 3 days later, I was assigned to the same section for routine maintenance. I requested a different assignment. My supervisor asked why. I said I wasn't feeling well, thought I might be coming down with something. He assigned someone else. That someone else was an engineer named Paolo, from Italy. Good guy, experienced, been on ships for 15 years. He went down to section C7 that night around midnight. He came back 40 minutes later and requested an immediate transfer to a different vessel. He wouldn't say why, just kept repeating that he wanted off this ship. The chief engineer called a meeting with all engineering staff the next morning. He told us that section C7 and the adjacent ventilation corridor were being temporarily sealed off for comprehensive system upgrades. No one was to enter that area until further notice. Maintenance schedules were adjusted accordingly. I tried talking to Paolo before he transferred off. I found him in the crew mess hall, packing his things. "What did you see down there?" I asked. He looked at me with haunted eyes. "You saw it too." It wasn't a question. He knew. "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know. I don't want to know. I've been at sea my whole adult life, and I've never seen anything like that. Whatever's in that corridor, it's not equipment malfunction. It's not temperature anomaly. It's something else." He transferred off the next day at Palermo. I heard later he quit working cruise ships entirely, took a job at a land-based power plant. I stuck it out for another month. But every night shift, knowing that corridor was just a few decks below wherever I was working, it got to me. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd hear that clanging sound in my dreams, see that shadow moving in impossible ways. I finally requested a transfer. They denied it, said they were short-staffed, needed experienced engineers for the Mediterranean season. I applied again, citing personal reasons. Denied again. The third time I applied, the chief engineer called me into his office. He closed the door and told me to sit down. "I know why you want off this ship," he said. I didn't respond. Section C7. You and Paolo both. And before you, there was an engineer 2 years ago who saw the same thing. And before that, another one. This ship has been in service for 12 years. And every few years, someone working night shift in those aft engine spaces sees something they can't explain. "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know, honestly. But I'll tell you what I do know. That section was sealed off for a reason. The maintenance logs were adjusted to remove any reference to anomalies. And if you want to transfer off this ship, you're going to sign a non-disclosure agreement first." He slid a document across the desk. Standard NDA, but with specific language about not discussing incidents, experiences, or observations made while employed on this vessel. Violation would result in termination and legal action. I signed it. What choice did I have? I got my transfer 6 weeks later. Different ship, same cruise line, Atlantic routes. I've been working here for 2 years now, and I've never seen anything unusual. No temperature anomalies, no shadows, no unexplained sounds. But sometimes, late at night when I'm doing maintenance checks in the engine rooms, I think about section C7. I think about that cold that shouldn't have existed. I think about the shadow that moved without moving. And I think about the fact that the cruise line knows. They've known for years. They seal off sections, they adjust logs, they make people sign NDAs, and then they send the ship right back out, with 4,000 passengers who have no idea what's lurking in the spaces below their feet. I don't know what I saw in that corridor. I don't know if it was something supernatural or some bizarre physical phenomenon, or a shared hallucination brought on by night shift work and engine vibrations. But I know I wasn't the first person to see it. And I know I won't be the last. The ship is still operating, still sailing the Mediterranean, and Section C7 is still sealed off, with a polite notice on the bulkhead door that says, "Authorized personnel only, system maintenance in progress." That notice has been there for 3 years now. My name is Elena. I'm from a small province outside Manila, and like thousands of other Filipinos, I went to sea to support my family back home. I trained as a cabin steward, got my STCW certification, and signed a 10-month contract with one of the big cruise lines. The work was hard. Cleaning 15 to 20 cabins per day, working split shifts, always smiling for passengers no matter how exhausted you felt. But the pay was better than anything I could make at home, and I could send money back to help my parents and younger siblings. Life on a cruise ship when you're crew is nothing like what passengers experience. They see the theaters, the pools, the fancy restaurants. We see the eye deck, the crew mess, the tiny cabins we share with 2 or 3 other people. We work in their world during the day, then disappear into our world at night, down corridors they'll never see, in sections of the ship that aren't on any passenger deck plan. This happened during a transatlantic crossing from Southampton to New York. 14 nights, no port stops, just open ocean. Those crossings are different from regular cruises. Fewer passengers, mostly older people who actually enjoy being at sea for 2 weeks straight. For crew, it meant longer stretches without a break, without setting foot on land, just the ship and the Atlantic and the work that never ended. My roommate was a girl named Marissa, also from the Philippines, also a cabin steward. We'd met during training and requested to room together. She was 24, from Cebu, always laughing, always talking about her boyfriend back home and how she was saving money for their wedding. We worked different sections of the ship but had similar schedules. So we'd see each other in the morning before shift and late at night, when we finally got back to our cabin. Our room was on Deck 1, in the crew dormitory section they call I Deck. Deck 1 is as low as you can go without being in the actual machinery spaces. It's below all the passenger decks, below the water line, with no windows and no natural light. Just long corridors of cabin doors, communal bathrooms, and the constant hum of the ship's engines vibrating through the walls. You get used to it after a while. The darkness, the noise, the feeling of being in a metal box surrounded by ocean. We'd been at sea for 3 days when I noticed Marissa wasn't sleeping in our cabin. The first night, I came back around 11 p.m. after my shift, and her bed was empty. I figured she'd picked up an extra shift or was hanging out with friends in the crew bar. The second night, same thing. Empty bed, no sign of her. I asked around the next day, but nobody had seen her. By the third night, I was worried. I hadn't seen Marissa in 72 hours. She wasn't answering her phone. Her bed looked like it hadn't been slept in. Her stuff was still in our cabin, her clothes, her toiletries, her photos of her family. But she was gone. I reported it to our supervisor, the head housekeeper. She was a stern Romanian woman who'd been working ships for 20 years. She told me Marissa had been reassigned to different duties and was staying in a different cabin temporarily. When I asked why, she just said it was a staffing issue and I shouldn't worry about it. But I did worry, because Marissa would have told me if she was being reassigned. We talked about everything. And why would she leave all her belongings in our room? On the fourth night, I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. It was 3:15 a.m. when I decided to go looking for her. I got dressed and went out into the I-deck corridor. At that hour, most crew were asleep. The lights were dimmed to half power, and the only sound was the ship's engines and the occasional creak of metal. I checked the crew rec room first. Empty. Then the crew gym. Nothing. I was heading toward the crew mess hall when I heard voices up ahead. Urgent, stressed voices. I turned the corner and saw two crew members in white uniforms standing outside the mess hall entrance. Medical staff. In the crew areas of a cruise ship, beneath thousands of sleeping passengers, there are emergencies that happen in silence. Problems that get solved before anyone above deck even knows something went wrong. I approached them. "What's happening?" One of them, a medic from Romania, turned to me. "Go back to your cabin. This doesn't concern you." "Is someone hurt?" "I'm looking for my roommate, Marissa. Have you seen her?" They exchanged a glance. The other medic, a woman from India, spoke quietly into her radio. Then the Romanian medic grabbed my arm, not roughly, but firmly. "You need to leave this area, now." I pulled my arm away and looked past them into the mess hall. The lights were on full, and I could see inside. Someone was lying on the floor near the serving counter. Even from that distance, I recognized the uniform. Cabin steward. The same uniform I wore. I pushed past them and ran inside before they could stop me. It was Marissa. She was unconscious on the floor, lying on her side. Her skin looked wrong, too pale, almost gray. Her lips had a blue tint. But what made my stomach turn was her eyes. They were open, but rolled back, showing mostly white. Her hands were clenched into fists, so tight her nails had cut into her palms. There was blood. I dropped to my knees beside her. "Marissa, what happened to her?" The two medics came in behind me. The woman grabbed my shoulders. "You need to step back. We're handling this." "Handling what? What's wrong with her?" "That's not your concern. Go back to your cabin." "She's my roommate. Tell me what's wrong." The Romanian medic was on his radio again, speaking rapidly in a language I didn't understand. Within minutes, two more crew members arrived with a stretcher. They lifted Marissa onto it carefully, and I noticed her body was rigid, like her muscles had locked. She didn't respond to being moved, didn't make a sound. They wheeled her out of the mess hall. I followed them down the corridor, demanding answers, but they ignored me. They took her through a section of Deck 1 I'd never been to before, past crew quarters, past storage areas, to a door marked Medical Authorized Personnel Only. The door closed behind them. I stood there in that corridor, alone, my heart pounding. What had happened to her? Why was she in the crew mess at 3 a.m? Why did she look like that? I went back to our cabin, but I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing her face, those rolled back eyes, her clenched fists. At 6 a.m., I got up and went to the crew medical center. A different medic was at the desk, an older man from the UK. "I need to know about my roommate," I said. "Marissa. They brought her in a few hours ago." He looked at his computer screen. "I can't discuss other crew members' medical information." "Please, I just need to know if she's okay." He glanced at me, and something in his expression softened slightly. "She's been transferred to the isolation ward. The ship's doctor is monitoring her condition." Isolation ward. For what? "I can't discuss her condition. Now, if you'll excuse me, can I see her?" "No visitors. Doctor's orders." I left the medical center and went straight to my supervisor. I told her what I'd seen, that Marissa was in isolation, that nobody would tell me what was wrong. She listened, her face carefully neutral. then told me to focus on my work and stop asking questions. But she's sick, I said. Her family should know. Someone should contact them. The medical team will handle all necessary communications. This is not your responsibility. Do your job, Elena. Don't make problems. There's a rule on ships that passengers never learn. What happens to crew stays with crew. Problems get contained. Information gets controlled. And if you don't cooperate, you find yourself on the next flight home. Over the next 2 days, I tried to find out more. I asked other stewards if they'd heard anything. Most hadn't. A few had heard rumors, something about contaminated food or a virus or an accident. Nobody knew for sure, and everyone was nervous about discussing it. On day 6 of the crossing, there was a crew meeting in the main mess hall. About 200 of us packed in there. The staff captain stood at the front and made an announcement. There had been an isolated medical incident involving one crew member. The situation was under control. The crew member had been treated for food poisoning and was recovering. There was no risk to anyone else. Anyone spreading rumors or discussing the incident would face disciplinary action. Food poisoning. I'd seen Marissa on that floor. Whatever was wrong with her, it wasn't food poisoning. Her skin, her eyes, the way her body had locked up. That wasn't from eating contaminated food. After the meeting, I cornered one of the medics I'd seen that night in the mess hall. The woman from India. I found her in the crew corridor and asked her directly, what really happened to Marissa? She looked around nervously, then spoke in a low voice. I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. Her vitals were all wrong. Her temperature was too low, her heart rate too slow. She wasn't responding to any stimulus. The doctor examined her and ordered immediate isolation. But they said food poisoning. She gave me a look that said everything. That's what they said. Now leave me alone. I can't talk about this. She walked away quickly, leaving me standing there. On day 8, we reached the halfway point of the crossing. I went to the medical center again and demanded to see Marissa. The medic at the desk, a different person each time I went, told me she was no longer on the ship. What do you mean? She was transferred. Transferred where? We're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. She was evacuated by helicopter 2 days ago. Medical emergency protocol. She's been transported to a hospital in Halifax. I stood there, trying to process this. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't anyone tell her roommate that she was being evacuated? I don't have that information. Now please, I have work to do. I went back to my cabin and looked at Marissa's belongings, still exactly where she'd left them. Her photos, her clothes, her phone charger still plugged into the wall. If she'd been evacuated, wouldn't someone have packed her things? Wouldn't they have told her family? I found her emergency contact information in our cabin, her mother's phone number in Cebu. I called from my phone, even though international calls were expensive. Her mother answered, confused about why I was calling. Have you heard from Marissa? I asked. Have the cruise line contacted you? No. Why? Is something wrong? My blood went cold. No, I've been trying to reach her. I'll have her call you. I hung up before she could ask more questions. The cruise line hadn't contacted Marissa's family. They didn't know she'd been evacuated. They didn't know anything. That night, the head housekeeper called me to her office. She told me that I was being reassigned to a different cabin. Marissa's belongings would be packed and shipped to her family. I was not to discuss Marissa with other crew members. I was not to contact her family again. If I did, I would be terminated and sent home at my own expense. But what happened to her? I asked. Where is she really? That's confidential medical information. Sign this. She pushed a document across the desk. It was a non-disclosure agreement, stating that I would not discuss any incidents or medical situations involving other crew members. Violation would result in immediate termination and possible legal action. I signed it. What choice did I have? I needed this job. My family depended on the money I sent home. We reached New York on day 14. During the turnaround, when passengers disembark and new ones board, I tried to find someone, anyone, who could tell me the truth about Marissa. But it was like she'd never existed. Her name wasn't on any crew roster anymore. Her email account had been deactivated. The cabin we'd shared had been reassigned to 2 other stewards who knew nothing about what had happened. I stayed with the cruise line for another 6 months, but I never found out what really happened to Marissa. I never saw her again. I tried calling her phone, disconnected. I tried reaching out to her family through social media. They said they'd received her belongings in the mail with a letter saying she'd resigned for personal reasons. They never heard from the cruise line about any medical emergency. I finished my contract and went home to the Philippines. I didn't renew it. I couldn't. Every time I walked through those I-deck corridors, I thought about finding Marissa on that mess hall floor, her eyes rolled back, her body rigid and wrong. I still don't know what happened to her. I don't know if she's alive or dead. I don't know what made her skin turn gray and her body lock up like that. I don't know why the cruise line lied about food poisoning, why they claimed she was evacuated when her family never heard about it, why they erased her from every system like she'd never been there. But I know this. Working in the crew areas of a cruise ship, you see things passengers never see. You learn that some problems get buried, some incidents get erased, and some people just disappear, and nobody asks too many questions because asking questions means you might disappear too. Marissa wanted to save money for her wedding. She wanted to go home to Cebu and marry her boyfriend and start a family. Instead, something happened to her in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and the cruise line made sure nobody would ever know what it was. I'm breaking my NDA by telling you this. I don't care anymore. Someone needs to know. Someone needs to remember that Marissa existed, that something happened to her, and that the company covered it up. Her family still doesn't know the truth, and they never will. My name is David. I'm an accountant from Toronto, married with 2 kids, and last year my wife convinced me we needed a family vacation. Something special, she said. Something the kids would remember. So we booked a 14-night Panama Canal cruise, one of those bucket list trips that people talk about for years afterward. Fort Lauderdale to Los Angeles, passing through one of the engineering marvels of the modern world, with stops at ports we'd never visited before. Our cabin was 3156 on deck 3, a standard inside room. No balcony, no window, but it was affordable for a family of 4, and we'd barely be in it anyway, except to sleep. My daughter Emma was 12, my son Luke was 9, and they were both excited about the pools, the mini-golf, the kids' club activities. My wife Jennifer had planned out every shore excursion. It was supposed to be perfect. The first week was perfect. We sailed down through the Caribbean, stopped in Aruba and Curaçao, watched dolphins from the ship's deck. The kids made friends with other families. We ate too much at the buffet. We took 1,000 photos. By day 8, when we docked in Cartagena, Colombia, we were already talking about booking another cruise when we got home. Cartagena was beautiful. We took a tour of the old walled city, visited Castillo San Felipe de Barajas, bought souvenirs from street vendors. It was hot, searingly hot, and we were all sunburned and exhausted when we got back to the ship around 4 p.m. Emma complained of a headache during dinner, but we figured it was just the heat and the long day of walking. By 9 p.m., she had a fever. Jennifer checked her temperature, 38.9 degrees Celsius. High, but not alarming for a kid who'd spent the day in tropical sun. We gave her children's acetaminophen and put her to bed. Luke was already asleep in the bunk above her. Jennifer and I stayed up watching TV, checking on Emma every hour. By midnight, her fever had climbed to 39.4, and she had a rash. It started on her chest and spread rapidly. Small red spots that looked like pinpricks under the skin. They didn't itch, Emma said. They just appeared, multiplying while we watched. Within an hour, the rash covered her torso, her arms, her neck. Her fever kept climbing despite the medication. At 1:30 a.m., we called the medical bay. The medical bay on a cruise ship is basically a small clinic, a few examination rooms, basic diagnostic equipment, a doctor, and a couple of nurses. It's designed for seasickness, minor injuries, maybe a heart attack or broken bone. It's not designed for what we found when we got there at 2 in the morning. The waiting area was packed. Easily 20 people, maybe more. Families with kids, elderly couples, a few solo passengers. And they all had the same thing Emma had: fever and rash, some worse than others. I saw a teenage boy with a rash covering his face. A woman who could barely sit up, a toddler crying inconsolably while his mother held a cold compress to his forehead. A nurse in scrubs came out, looking exhausted and stressed. She took Emma's temperature, 39.7 now, and examined the rash briefly. Then she told us to go back to our cabin and wait. Someone would come check on us. Wait for what? Jennifer demanded. What is this? What's happening to her? The doctor will evaluate all patients and determine appropriate treatment. Please return to your cabin. Someone will come to you. Is this contagious? Is this an outbreak? The nurse's expression didn't change, but I saw something flash in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or just exhaustion. Please return to your cabin. Lock your door. Don't leave until medical staff contacts you. When a cruise ship is in international waters, normal rules don't apply. The company becomes its own government, and they decide what information you get to know and when you get to know it. We took Emma back to cabin 3156. Jennifer was terrified. I was trying to stay calm for the kids, and Luke had woken up asking what was wrong with his sister. The rash was spreading to Emma's face now. Her fever wouldn't break. At 4:15 a.m., someone knocked on our door. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in full protective gear. Gown, gloves, face shield, the kind of PPE you see in movies about epidemics. My stomach dropped. I opened the door. He introduced himself as one of the ship's medical officers, didn't give his name. He examined Emma without coming fully into our cabin, standing in the doorway with his medical kit. He took her temperature, looked at the rash, asked questions about where we'd been in Cartagena, what we'd eaten, what we'd touched. Then he told us Emma needed to be isolated. Isolated where? Jennifer asked. We've set up a quarantine area for affected passengers. It's necessary to prevent further spread. Spread of what? What does she have? We're still determining that. We've sent samples for testing. Until we have results, all symptomatic passengers need to be separated from the general population. I'm going with her, Jennifer said immediately. The medical officer hesitated, then nodded. One parent can accompany her. The other parent and sibling need to remain in this cabin. Full quarantine, no leaving. Meals will be delivered. A medical team will check on you every 6 hours. They took Emma and Jennifer at 4:45 a.m. I watched them walk down the corridor, my wife holding our daughter's hand, following the medical officer toward the elevators. The corridor was eerily quiet. No other passengers. Just closed cabin doors and that industrial carpet and fluorescent lighting that made everything look sickly. Luke and I were alone in cabin 3156. He was scared. I was scared. I told him it would be okay, that Emma just had a bug and the doctors would fix it. But I didn't know if I believed it myself. At 6 a.m., I heard movement in the corridor. Voices, footsteps, the sound of doors opening and closing. I looked through the peephole and saw medical staff going door to door in our section of Deck 3. They were examining passengers, taking temperatures, checking for rashes. At least 6 other cabins in our corridor had affected passengers. At 7 a.m., security personnel appeared at both ends of our corridor. They weren't letting anyone in or out. Our entire section of Deck 3 had been quarantined. I turned on the TV to the ship's information channel, expecting some kind of announcement or explanation. Nothing. Just the usual channel showing daily activities, port information for our next stop in Panama City, restaurant hours. No mention of any medical situation. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. They'd taken Emma to a converted conference room on Deck 2 that had been turned into a makeshift isolation ward. There were at least 40 people there, she said, all with the same symptoms, some much worse than Emma. The medical staff was overwhelmed. They'd run out of IV bags. The doctor told her they'd contacted the CDC and were waiting for guidance, but it would take time to get test results back. Another text. They're not telling anyone. The ship is continuing to Panama City tomorrow, like nothing is wrong. I tried calling the medical bay. No answer. I tried calling guest services. After 20 minutes on hold, someone told me a medical team would update me soon and then hung up. At noon, someone knocked on our door. A woman in a ship officer's uniform, not medical staff. She had a tablet and a very professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. She asked how Luke and I were feeling. No symptoms, I told her. And then she said she needed me to sign some documents. What documents? Liability waivers. Standard procedure for any medical incident on board. It confirms that you've been informed of the situation and that the cruise line has provided appropriate medical care. I read through the documents on her tablet. Legal language, most of which I didn't fully understand. But the gist was clear. By signing, I was agreeing not to hold the cruise line responsible for any illness contracted during the voyage. I was acknowledging that they'd provided adequate medical care. And I was agreeing not to discuss the incident publicly or with media. What if I don't sign? Her smile tightened slightly. It's in your best interest to sign. We're offering compensation, a future cruise credit valued at 50% of this voyage's cost, plus reimbursement for any medical expenses incurred, but only for passengers who cooperate with our protocols. You're bribing people to stay quiet about an outbreak. We're providing compensation for the inconvenience of a medical situation that is being properly managed according to maritime health regulations. Your daughter is receiving excellent care, but we do need your cooperation. Cruise ships operate in a legal gray area that most passengers never think about. The company's terms and conditions give them extraordinary power over how incidents are handled, reported, and resolved. I signed. What else could I do? My daughter was in their isolation ward. We were in the middle of the ocean. They controlled everything: the medical care, the information, our ability to leave or communicate with the outside world. The woman thanked me, reminded me to stay in my cabin, and left. Luke started showing symptoms that evening. Fever first, then the rash. I called the medical bay, and they came to take him within an hour. Now I was alone in cabin 3156, my entire family in quarantine, and I had no idea what was actually wrong with them. I spent the night refreshing news websites on my phone, searching for any reports of a cruise ship outbreak. Nothing. I checked social media. Other passengers from the ship were posting photos from dinner, from the evening show, from the casino. Happy vacation pictures. No mention of the 40-plus people isolated on Deck 2 or the quarantined corridor on Deck 3. The ship's daily newsletter arrived under our door at 6 a.m. the next morning. I picked it up and read through it. Weather forecast, port information for Panama City, today's activities, tonight's entertainment. At the bottom, in small print, please note that due to enhanced sanitation protocols, certain areas of Deck 2 are temporarily unavailable. We apologize for any inconvenience. That was it. Enhanced sanitation protocols. No mention of an outbreak. No warning to passengers about symptoms to watch for. Nothing. We docked in Panama City at 8 a.m. I watched from my cabin's corridor view as passengers disembarked for their shore excursions, walking down the gangway into the port, completely unaware that there were sick people quarantined on the ship. The cruise line was continuing normal operations, like nothing was wrong. I got another text from Jennifer. CDC was supposedly notified, but there's been a delay in processing the notification. No test results yet. Doctor says might be dengue fever from Cartagena, but transmission pattern doesn't make sense. Too many people sick too quickly. They don't know what it is. That afternoon, a different ship officer came to my door. He informed me that my family would be released from quarantine that evening. Fever had broken, rash was fading. They were no longer considered contagious. I could pick them up from the medical bay at 6 p.m. What was it? I asked. What did they have? The doctor will discuss that with you when you collect your family. At 6 p.m., I went to the medical bay. Jennifer looked exhausted. Emma and Luke looked pale and weak, but better than before. The doctor, a middle-aged man with a German accent, told me they'd likely contracted a viral infection during the Cartagena port stop. Common in tropical climates, he said. Nothing to worry about. They'd made full recoveries. What about the other 40 people? I asked. The ones in the isolation ward. All recovering well. The situation is under control. Have you notified the CDC? Are they investigating? His expression became guarded. All appropriate health authorities have been notified according to maritime regulations. Now, if you'll sign your discharge paperwork, your family is free to return to normal activities. More paperwork? More liability waivers? I signed everything. We went back to cabin 3156. For the rest of the cruise, we tried to enjoy ourselves, but the whole experience was tainted. We saw other families who'd clearly been in quarantine. You could spot them by the lingering pallor, the way they moved carefully, like they were still weak. None of us talked about it. There was an unspoken agreement to pretend everything was fine. The ship's photographers were everywhere, taking pictures for the photo gallery, and I noticed they carefully avoided certain areas where quarantined passengers might appear. The daily newsletters never mentioned the outbreak again. The entertainment staff kept the scheduled activities going like it was just another normal cruise. We completed the Panama Canal transit, the whole reason we'd booked this trip, and I barely remember it. I was too busy wondering what had actually infected my kids, whether the CDC had really been notified, whether we'd been exposed to something serious that the cruise line was covering up. When we disembarked in Los Angeles 2 weeks after we'd started, a representative from the cruise line met our family at the terminal. She handed Jennifer an envelope containing vouchers for that 50% future cruise credit they'd promised. She reminded us that we'd signed non-disclosure agreements and that sharing false information about shipboard incidents could result in legal action. We never used those vouchers. When we got home to Toronto, I took Emma and Luke to our family doctor. I told him everything that had happened. He ran blood tests, looking for dengue, for other tropical diseases, for anything that might explain the fever and rash. Everything came back negative. Whatever they'd had, it was gone, leaving no trace. I tried filing a report with the Canadian health authorities. They told me it was outside their jurisdiction. The ship was registered in the Bahamas. The incident occurred in international waters, and I'd have to contact the ship's flag state authorities. I tried that too. Never got a response. I searched online for news about the cruise, about any outbreak investigation, about CDC notifications. I found nothing. Not a single article, not a single health alert, not a single indication that anything unusual had happened on that 14-night Panama Canal cruise. But I know what happened. I know my kids got sick. I know 40 other people got sick. I know the cruise line quarantined entire corridors, continued operating normally, pressured passengers into signing waivers, and made the whole incident disappear. We were supposed to remember that trip for years. We do remember it, just not the way we expected to. We remember being afraid, being lied to, being powerless in the middle of the ocean, while a company cared more about their reputation than about transparency. The cruise industry is worth billions. They move millions of passengers every year. And when something goes wrong, they have lawyers and protocols and legal frameworks designed to make sure that whatever happened stays buried. My family was lucky. Emma and Luke recovered. But I think about the other families in that isolation ward. Wonder if they all recovered. Wonder if any of them tried to speak up and got the same response I did. Silence and legal threats and vouchers for future cruises. The ocean covers 70% of the earth. And what happens on ships in international waters stays there, unless someone decides it's worth risking everything to tell the truth. I'm risking it now, because somebody needs to know. My name is James. I'm an HVAC maintenance technician, Australian by birth, and I've spent the last 12 years working on commercial vessels, cargo ships, tankers, and for the past 5 years, cruise ships. I specialized in climate control systems, the massive network of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning that keeps thousands of passengers comfortable while they're at sea. It's complex work, the kind most people never think about. They just assume the air in their cabin stays cool and fresh by magic. They don't know about the miles of ductwork, the filtration systems, the machinery that operates 24 hours a day in spaces they'll never see. The ship I was working on ran Alaska inside passage routes during summer season. 7-day loops from Seattle up through the fjords, stopping at Ketchikan, Juneau, Skagway, and Victoria. Massive vessel, over 3,000 passengers, 14 decks of cabins, and public spaces. The HVAC system was distributed across multiple machinery areas, with the primary ventilation control on Deck 2 in the aft engineering section. My shift rotation put me on nights twice a week, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Night maintenance was when we did the work that couldn't happen during the day, with passengers moving around. Filter replacements, duct cleaning, system diagnostics, anything that might cause temporary temperature fluctuations or airflow disruptions. You worked alone most of the time, or with maybe one other technician, moving through those engineering spaces with just your tools and your checklist. This happened in mid-July, our busiest season. We were on night 4 of a 7-day cruise, sailing overnight from Glacier Bay toward Juneau. The weather was typical for southeast Alaska. Cool, misty, that perpetual twilight that passes for night during summer months up there. Most passengers were asleep by 11. By midnight, The ship was quiet, except for the casino, the late-night buffet, and the crew areas where we kept working. I came on shift at 8 and got my assignments from the chief engineer. Routine stuff mostly, but one item stood out. Replace air filters in the main ventilation trunk, section V14. That section handled air distribution for decks 5 through 8, passenger cabins and corridors. The filters were on a 6-week replacement cycle, and we were due. I gathered my equipment, replacement filters, tools, protective gear, and headed down to Deck 2. The aft engineering section is accessed through a series of watertight doors and steep metal stairs. You descend into increasing noise and heat, past generator rooms and pump stations, until you reach the ventilation control area. It's a dedicated space about the size of a gymnasium, filled with massive air handling units, ductwork that ranges from pipes you could crawl through to trunks wide enough to walk through, and monitoring equipment that tracks air quality and flow rates throughout the ship. Section V14 was in the far aft corner, a main trunk that fed into smaller distribution ducts. The access panel was about 3 meters off the deck, requiring a ladder to reach. Standard procedure: shut down that section's airflow temporarily, open the access panel, pull the old filters, install new ones, seal it back up, restart the system. 30-minute job, maybe 40 if you worked carefully. I reached the area around 1:15 a.m. The space was empty. No other technicians nearby, just me and the constant mechanical noise of the HVAC system running. I positioned my ladder, climbed up, and opened the control valve to shut down airflow to section V14. The pressure equalized with a long hiss, and the rushing wind sound from the ductwork faded to silence. Then I smelled it. Faint at first, just an odd note mixed with the usual mechanical smells of metal and dust. But as I unfastened the access panel bolts, it got stronger. A biological smell. Organic decay. Like something had died and was rotting. Air moves through every part of a cruise ship. It touches every cabin, every corridor, every public space. And if something gets into that air system, 3,000 people breathe it without knowing. I dealt with dead animals in ventilation systems before. Birds that flew into intake vents in port, rats that sometimes made it aboard despite best efforts. The smell was unpleasant, but familiar. This was different. Worse. Sweeter and more corrupt, if that makes sense. I pulled my dust mask up over my nose and removed the access panel completely. The opening revealed the interior of the main trunk. A rectangular duct about 2 meters wide and 1 meter tall, running horizontally through the engineering space. I shined my flashlight inside. The filters were there, mounted in their frames about 1 meter back from the access point. They were supposed to be white or light gray. These were dark, stained, with something that looked wet coating the surface. My first thought was a coolant leak, maybe hydraulic fluid that had somehow contaminated the airflow. But the smell coming from that duct was definitely organic. I needed to pull those filters out for replacement anyway. So I reached in carefully, released the mounting clips, and slid the first filter toward me. It was heavier than it should be, and when I got it out into the light, I understood why. There was biological material caught in the filter media, not just dust or lint or the normal particulate you'd expect. This was tissue, flesh. I could see it clearly under my flashlight, organic matter that had been pulled through the ventilation system and caught by the filter. Small pieces, partially decomposed, but definitely biological. My stomach turned. I set the filter down on the deck and pulled out the second one. Same thing. More biological material, some pieces larger than the first filter. One piece looked like it might have been skin, with what could have been hair still attached. I backed down the ladder quickly and radioed the engineering. Control room. This is maintenance tech in aft ventilation section. I need a supervisor down here immediately. We have a contamination situation. The response came back within seconds. Define contamination. Biological material in the main trunk filters. Significant amount. Unknown origin. There was a pause, then. Stay in position. Supervisor and security en route. I stood there next to my ladder, looking at those filters on the deck with their dark stains and the pieces of tissue caught in the media. My mind was trying to work out how this could happen. Animals couldn't get into a main trunk. The intake filters on the weather decks would catch anything that size. The system was sealed, pressure monitored. Impossible for contamination from outside unless something catastrophic had failed. But if it wasn't from outside, that meant it came from inside the ship, from somewhere in the duct system itself. The supervisor arrived first, a senior engineer from Norway who'd been running cruise ship systems for 20 years. I showed him the filters. His face went pale under the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Where's the rest of it?" he asked. "Rest of what?" "This much material in the filters means there's more upstream, somewhere in the duct system between here and the intake." He climbed the ladder and looked into the trunk with his own flashlight, shining it deeper into the duct. I saw his posture change. He went very still. "We need to seal this section now," he said quietly. "And we need security." Security arrived 5 minutes later. 2 officers in uniform with radios and that careful alertness that security has when they know something is seriously wrong. The supervisor explained the situation in technical terms, but the bottom line was clear. There was biological contamination in the main ventilation system, origin unknown, and it needed to be investigated immediately. One of the security officers radioed for additional personnel. Within 20 minutes, there were 8 people in that engineering space. Security, senior engineering staff, and someone from the ship's safety office. They established a perimeter around section V14. No one else was allowed in. A senior officer I didn't recognize, someone from ship management, arrived and took charge. He looked at the contaminated filters, looked into the trunk, then made a decision. Seal this access point. Shut down the entire V14 system. Reroute airflow through backup distribution, and clear all non-essential personnel from this area. "What about investigating the source?" the supervisor asked. "If there's biological material in there, we need to find where it's coming from. That investigation will be handled by designated personnel. Right now, we contain and seal." He looked directly at me. "You discovered this?" "Yes, sir." "You'll need to write a detailed incident report. Everything you saw, everything you did, exact timeline. Submit it to my office within 2 hours." He handed me a card with an email address. "And you don't discuss this with anyone. Not crew, not other technicians. No one. Understood?" "What about the contamination? What if it's in other parts of the system?" "We'll conduct a full inspection. But for now, complete silence. This is a potential health situation, and we don't need panic. When you're in the middle of the ocean, information is currency. The company controls what passengers know, what crew knows, what authorities know. And they decide when keeping secrets is more valuable than telling the truth. They cleared everyone out except for a specialized team that arrived with sealed containers and what looked like hazmat protocols. I went to the engineering office and spent 2 hours writing the most detailed report I'd ever written. Every observation, every timeline detail, every measurement. I attached photos I'd taken with my tablet before security arrived. I submitted the report at 3:45 a.m. and went back to complete my other scheduled maintenance tasks. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Biological material in the ventilation filters, tissue, possibly flesh and hair. How does that get into a sealed air system? The next day, I came on shift expecting to hear something about the investigation. Instead, I was told I'd been temporarily reassigned. No more work in the aft ventilation sections. I was moved to chiller maintenance on Deck 3, different area entirely. I asked why. My supervisor, a different person than the night before, said it was routine shift balancing. When I pressed, he told me not to ask questions. Over the next 3 days, I watched as the entire HVAC crew that had any access to the aft engineering section got reassigned. New technicians rotated in. People from other ships in the fleet who didn't know the systems as well. Those of us who'd been reassigned didn't talk about it, but you could see it in everyone's faces. We all knew something was wrong. On day 6 of the cruise, the day before we returned to Seattle, I was called to a meeting in the chief engineer's office. Just me, him, and someone from the ship's legal department. They told me that my incident report had been reviewed. The contamination I discovered was from a food waste processing system malfunction that had created a pressure differential, pulling particles into the ventilation system. It had been resolved. The section had been cleaned and sanitized. Normal operations had resumed. Food waste? I said. That material looked like tissue, organic tissue. The legal representative spoke. The laboratory analysis identified it as processed food products and organic waste from galley operations. The system malfunction has been corrected. I'd like to see that lab analysis. That's internal information. What I need from you is confirmation that you understand the situation has been resolved and that you won't be discussing it further. There it was, the real purpose of the meeting. And if I do discuss it, then you'll be in violation of your employment contract, which includes confidentiality clauses regarding ship operations. Termination would be immediate, and you'd be liable for damages related to spreading false information about health and safety conditions. I looked at the chief engineer. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I agreed. What choice did I have? I needed this job. I had bills, a mortgage back in Perth, commitments. And they were telling me it was just a waste system malfunction, nothing sinister, nothing dangerous. But I didn't believe them. The cruise ended. Passengers disembarked. During the turnaround, I managed to get down to the aft ventilation section during my break. I wanted to see section V14, see if it really had been cleaned and reopened. The access panel was gone. The entire section where it had been was covered with a freshly welded steel plate. No access point. No way to get into that trunk. Just smooth metal covering what used to be there. I checked the system schematics later. Section V14 was listed as decommissioned. The airflow had been permanently rerouted through other distribution trunks. That entire section of ductwork, probably 40 meters of main trunk plus all its branches, had been sealed off and removed from the active system. That's not what you do for a food waste malfunction. That's what you do when you find something you don't want found again. I finished out the season in Alaska, then requested a transfer. They granted it surprisingly quickly. I'm on a different ship now, different cruise line entirely, working Caribbean routes. I left that company and never looked back. But I still think about those filters, about the biological material caught in the media, about how much of it might have been circulating through the ventilation system before the filters caught it. About 3,000 passengers breathing that air, sleeping in cabins fed by those ducts, never knowing what was moving through the system above their heads. I tried filing a report with maritime safety authorities. Never got a response. I tried reaching out to other technicians who'd been in that engineering section. None of them would talk to me. My incident report, the one I spent 2 hours writing with every detail documented, I tried accessing it months later through the company's system. It wasn't there. No record of it. Like it had never existed. The ship is still operating, still running Alaska routes every summer. And somewhere in the aft engineering section of Deck 2, there's a welded steel plate covering section V14, and nobody will ever know what was really found in those ducts. I know what I saw. I know what I smelled. I know the difference between food waste and organic tissue. And I know that when a cruise line finds something they don't want found, they seal it. They reassign everyone who saw it. They rewrite the records. And they threaten anyone who asks questions. The air you breathe on a cruise ship has been through miles of ductwork, past equipment and filters and spaces most passengers never imagine. It's cleaned and cooled and circulated back to you over and over for the entire voyage. And if something gets into that system, if something contaminates it, you'll never know. Unless you're the technician who discovers it at 1:20 in the morning, pulls out filters that shouldn't look like that, and realizes the company would rather weld shut an entire section than tell anyone the truth. I sleep with windows open now, even in winter, even when it's cold. I don't trust ventilation systems anymore, and I never will again. My name is Isla. I got married last October in a small ceremony in Portland, Oregon. My husband, I still get a thrill saying that word, proposed on a hiking trail overlooking the Columbia River Gorge. And 6 months later, we were standing in front of 50 friends and family, promising forever. For our honeymoon, we wanted something relaxing, tropical, romantic. We booked a 7-night Western Caribbean cruise leaving from Tampa, and we splurged on a mini-suite. After all the wedding expenses, it felt extravagant. But we told ourselves we deserved it. Once-in-a-lifetime trip, right? The suite was 11-15-24 on Deck 11 forward section. When we booked it, the photos looked incredible. Separate living area, larger bathroom with a soaking tub, private balcony, recently refurbished with modern decor. The booking agent mentioned it was in a newly renovated section of the ship. Suite upgrades had just been completed that season, she said. We'd be among the first guests to stay in the updated accommodations. We boarded in Tampa on a Saturday afternoon. The suite was everything the photos promised: contemporary furniture, plush bedding, marble bathroom, floor-to-ceiling windows leading to the balcony. My husband carried me over the threshold like we were entering our first home together, and we both laughed, giddy and exhausted from the wedding week. We unpacked, attended the muster drill, and then went to dinner. By the time we got back to 11-24 around 10 p.m., we were ready to collapse. The first night was perfect. We fell asleep watching the lights of Tampa fade in the distance through our balcony door, the gentle rocking of the ship lulling us into deep, dreamless sleep. The second night was when it started. I woke suddenly at 3:33 a.m. I know the exact time because the digital clock on the nightstand was right at eye level when I opened my eyes. The room was dark except for that clock and the faint glow of emergency lighting from under the cabin door. My husband was still asleep beside me, breathing deeply. I heard water running. Not the pipes in the walls, though you hear those on ships sometimes. This was closer. It sounded like it was coming from our bathroom. I lay there listening, thinking maybe I was hearing something from the cabin next door or above us. But the sound was too distinct, too close. I got up and walked to the bathroom. The door was ajar, we'd left it open, and I could see the light from the sink area reflecting off the mirror. I pushed the door fully open. The bathroom faucet was running. Full pressure, hot water based on the steam rising from the basin. I turned it off, my heart beating faster than it should for something so simple. I must have not closed it properly earlier, I told myself. Loose handle, water pressure issues, something mechanical. Ships have plumbing quirks. I went back to bed and eventually fell asleep again. At breakfast the next morning, I mentioned it to my husband. He laughed and said I probably got up, half asleep, and didn't remember turning it on. Newly married to someone who apparently sleepwalks, he joked. I didn't think I was sleepwalking, but I let it go. That day we stopped at Cozumel. We went snorkeling, had lunch at a beachside restaurant, bought souvenirs we didn't need. By the time we got back to the ship, we were sunburned and happy and tired. We showered, changed for dinner, and left the suite around 6 p.m. When we came back at 10, something was different. My husband noticed it first. "Did you move my watch?" He'd left it on the nightstand on his side of the bed. Now it was on the desk across the room, placed carefully next to the room service menu. I hadn't touched it. He looked at me with a confused expression, then shrugged. "Maybe the cabin steward moved it while making up the room," he said. But the cabin steward had already been there earlier in the day, while we were at port. The watch had been on the nightstand when we left for dinner. We'd both seen it there. We didn't say anything else about it. We were on our honeymoon. We weren't going to let weird little things ruin the mood. We went to bed and made a conscious decision not to think about faucets or moved watches or anything except enjoying our time together. Honeymoon suites are supposed to be where marriages begin with joy and promise. But sometimes, the room has a memory of something that came before. And that memory doesn't rest quietly. I woke at 3:33 a.m. again. The bathroom water was running again. This time my husband woke too, hearing the sound from his side of the bed. We both got up and went to the bathroom together. The faucet was on, full pressure, hot water steaming. We stood there staring at it for a long moment before he reached over and turned it off. That's really weird," he said. "It happened last night too. Same time." He checked the faucet mechanism, testing the handle, looking for a mechanical explanation. It seemed fine. Nothing loose, nothing broken. It shouldn't turn itself on. That's not how faucets work. We went back to bed, but neither of us slept much after that. The next morning, our cabin steward came to clean while we were having breakfast. His name was Carlos, from Honduras, maybe early 30s. Friendly, professional, always asking if we needed anything. When we returned to the suite around 11, I decided to ask him about the bathroom. "Carlos, has anyone else mentioned issues with the bathroom faucet in this suite? It keeps turning on by itself." The change in his expression was immediate. The friendly smile disappeared, replaced by something more guarded. He glanced toward the bathroom, then back at me. "The faucet turns on?" he asked quietly. "Yes, at night. Actually, at exactly the same time both nights. 3:33 a.m. He nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something he already knew. "I will report this to maintenance. They will check the plumbing." "Has this happened before?" Another pause. He looked around the suite, and I got the feeling he was deciding how much to say. "This suite, it has history." "What kind of history?" "Before the refurbishment, this was crew officer quarters, not passenger accommodation. They converted this entire section when they renovated." He was choosing his words carefully. Some crew, they said things about these cabins, about experiences. What kind of experiences? He shook his head. I should not say. I will report the faucet. Maintenance will fix it. He left quickly, and I was standing there with more questions than answers. That afternoon, I went to guest services on Deck 5. The woman behind the counter had the practiced cheerfulness of someone who dealt with complaints all day. Hi, we're in suite 1124, and we're having some issues with the room. We'd like to request a room change. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. What kind of issues? Plumbing problems. The bathroom faucet keeps turning on by itself. And some other strange things. I can send maintenance to look at the plumbing. As for a room change, we're completely sold out this sailing. No suites available. What about a regular cabin? We take a downgrade. She looked at her screen, then shook her head. I'm not showing any availability. The ship is at full capacity. But I assure you, maintenance can resolve any mechanical issues. The cabin steward said this suite has a history. What did he mean by that? Her expression became carefully neutral. I'm not aware of any history. The suite was recently refurbished to the highest standards. If you're experiencing technical difficulties, we'll address them. Is there anything else I can help you with? I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere. No, thank you. That night, my husband and I discussed whether we were being ridiculous. A faucet turning on. Maybe it was water pressure. Maybe it was some weird mechanical thing with the ship's plumbing. The moved watch. Maybe we'd moved it ourselves and forgotten. We were in a new place, jet-lagged from traveling, our routines disrupted. Maybe we were just on edge. We decided to stay in the suite. We'd paid for it after all, and we weren't going to let plumbing issues ruin our honeymoon. At 3:33 a.m., the water started running again. But this time, something else happened. The temperature in the room dropped. Not gradually, suddenly. I could see my breath in the air. The thermostat on the wall was lit up, and when I looked at it, the display was flashing between different temperatures. 18 degrees, 14 degrees, 10 degrees. Numbers that didn't make sense for the settings we'd selected. The bathroom water was running. My husband got up to turn it off, and as he reached the bathroom door, we both heard it. Footsteps in the living area of our suite. The distinct sound of someone walking across the carpeted floor. Slow, deliberate steps from the balcony door toward the cabin door. We both froze. My husband grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it toward the living area. Empty. No one there. But the footsteps continued for 3 more steps, then stopped. The bathroom faucet shut off by itself. The temperature started climbing back to normal. Within 30 seconds, the room felt fine again, like nothing had happened. But we'd both heard it. Both felt the cold. Both seen the thermostat display going haywire. We turned on every light in the suite and sat on the bed, neither of us speaking for a long time. We're not crazy, right? My husband finally said. We both just experienced the same thing, so either we're both crazy or something is wrong with this room. At 7 a.m., I went back to guest services. Different person at the desk this time, a man with a British accent and a nameplate that said Guest Relations Manager. I told him everything. The faucet, the moved objects, the temperature drop, the footsteps. I told him the cabin steward mentioned the suite had history. I told him we wanted out of that room immediately. He listened patiently, his expression sympathetic but non-committal. I understand this has been distressing. Let me see what I can do. He made some calls, typed on his computer, consulted with someone in the back office. After 20 minutes, he came back to me. "I can offer you a cabin on deck 8. It's an inside cabin, no window, smaller than your suite. But it's available starting tonight. We'll take it. However, there won't be any refund for the suite price difference, and..." He hesitated. "I need to ask you not to discuss this situation with other passengers. We don't want to create unnecessary concern." "Other passengers? Have other people complained about that suite?" "I can't discuss other guests' experiences. But I'm sure you understand that discussing paranormal claims can cause distress among passengers and isn't in anyone's best interest." So that was it. They knew. They knew that suite had problems, and they were still booking people into it. And when guests complained, they moved them quietly and asked them to keep quiet. We moved to the inside cabin that evening. It was tiny, dark, nothing like the honeymoon suite we'd imagined. But nothing strange happened there. We slept through the night without mysterious faucets or footsteps or temperature drops. On the last night of the cruise, I met another couple at dinner. They were probably in their 50s, celebrating their anniversary. We got talking, and somehow the conversation turned to cabin accommodations. "We were supposed to be in a suite on deck 11, the woman said. "But they moved us to a different cabin the first night. Something about maintenance issues." My stomach tightened. "What suite number?" "I don't remember exactly. 11 something. Forward section." "Did you experience anything unusual before they moved you?" She and her husband exchanged a glance. "Why do you ask?" I told them our story. About 11:15:24, the faucet, the footsteps, the cold. As I spoke, the color drained from the woman's face. "That's the same suite," she said quietly. "We only spent one night there. The bathroom water was running when we woke up. And I swear I heard someone walking around our room. They moved us the next day when I complained." So it wasn't just us. Other passengers had experienced the same things. And the cruise line's response was to quietly move people and ask them not to talk about it. When we got home from the cruise, I did some research. I tried to find information about that ship, about Deck 11, about what those cabins were before the refurbishment. I found an old crew forum where someone mentioned that officer quarters on that ship used to be on Deck 11 forward, and that there was an incident years ago. Something about an officer who died in one of those cabins. No details, just vague references and speculation. I also found something else. When I tried to book Suite 11-24 on the cruise line's website for future sailings, it wasn't available. Not booked, just not listed. Like it had been removed from the inventory. All the other suites on Deck 11 showed up. Just not 11-15-24. My husband and I still have the photos from our honeymoon. We're smiling in front of Mayan ruins, toasting with tropical drinks by the pool, posing on our balcony with the ocean behind us. Beautiful memories of a beautiful trip. But we don't have any photos from inside Suite 11-24. Neither of us wanted to look at that room long enough to take pictures. And when people ask us about our honeymoon cruise, we tell them it was wonderful, which is mostly true. We just don't tell them about the suite. We don't tell them about waking at 3:33 a.m. to running water and footsteps and impossible cold. We don't tell them that somewhere on that ship there's a refurbished mini-suite that crew members won't talk about, that gets quietly removed from bookings, that has a history the cruise line will never acknowledge. We don't tell them that our honeymoon started in a room where someone was still there, still following routines that don't belong to the living, still walking through space that used to be crew quarters before it became passenger accommodation. The ocean doesn't care about renovations and refurbishments. It doesn't care that you painted the walls and replaced the furniture and tried to make it beautiful. Some rooms remember what happened in them, and no amount of marble and modern decor will make those memories rest. We learned that on our honeymoon, and we'll never forget it. My name is Ethan. I've been a merchant marine officer for 23 years. Started as a deck cadet right out of Maritime Academy. Worked my way up through the ranks on cargo vessels, tankers, and eventually cruise ships. For the past 8 years, I held the position of third navigation officer on one of the largest cruise ships in the transatlantic fleet. The bridge of a ship that size is where all the critical decisions happen. Navigation, weather monitoring, collision avoidance, communication with port authorities. It's the nerve center, and serving as a bridge officer means you're trusted with the safety of thousands of lives. Third officer typically takes the 8 to 12 watch, 8 p.m. to midnight, and 8 a.m. to noon. But during certain crossings, especially transatlantic voyages, we rotated to cover the critical overnight hours when passenger and crew activity was minimal, and you needed experienced eyes on the instruments. That's how I ended up on the 2 to 4 a.m. watch during a crossing from Southampton to New York. Transatlantic crossings are different from coastal cruising. You're out there for 6 or 7 days straight with nothing around you but open ocean. No land, no other vessels most of the time. Just thousands of miles of dark water in every direction. The North Atlantic in November is particularly isolating. Rough seas, limited visibility, weather systems that move fast and hit hard. You develop a rhythm up on the bridge during those crossings. You monitor instruments, log weather observations, make minor course corrections, and mostly you watch. Always watching. This happened during the 4th night of a 7-night crossing. We'd departed Southampton 4 days earlier, bound for New York with about 2,800 passengers and 1,200 crew. The weather had been rough but manageable. 15-foot swells, occasional rain squalls, winds around 30 knots. Nothing the ship couldn't handle. We were maintaining our scheduled speed of 22 knots, right on course. I came on watch at 2 a.m. The bridge was dimly lit. Just the instrument panels and chart displays casting that bluish glow you get from modern navigation equipment. The officer I was relieving gave me the standard brief. Course 285 degrees. Speed 22 knots. Next waypoint in 4 hours. Weather holding steady. Nothing unusual. He looked tired, ready to get off watch and get some sleep. I settled into the routine. Checked the radar display, the electronic chart, the weather systems moving across our projected path. The helmsman was an AB from the Philippines, experienced, steady. We had a lookout posted on the bridge wing, standard procedure even though radar does most of the work these days. Just the 3 of us up there at that hour, 14 decks above the waterline, surrounded by darkness and ocean. At 2:17 a.m., the radar picked up something. A contact bearing 287 degrees, range 12 nautical miles. Dead ahead, slightly to port. Stationary, I looked at the display more carefully. Ships show up on radar as moving targets, with vectors indicating their speed and direction. This contact had no vector. It wasn't moving. It was just sitting there in the middle of the North Atlantic shipping lane. That's unusual, but not unheard of. Sometimes you get fishing vessels that drift while working nets. Occasionally, a cargo ship will stop for mechanical repairs. I adjusted the radar range to get a better picture of the contact's size. The return signal was large, really large. Too big for a fishing boat, bigger than most cargo vessels. The radar painted it as a solid mass, maybe 200 meters long. I called the lookout inside. "You see anything bearing 287, about 10 miles out?" He looked through the bridge binoculars, scanning the darkness. Nothing visible, sir. Too much ambient moisture. Visibility maybe 3 miles at best. I checked the AIS, the automatic identification system that all commercial vessels are required to broadcast. It shows you every ship in range with their name, course, speed, and destination. The display showed nothing in that bearing. No AIS signal at all. On the bridge of a cruise ship in the middle of the Atlantic, you're surrounded by technology designed to show you everything within 50 miles. When something appears that the technology can't identify, your training tells you to investigate. Your instincts tell you something else. I logged the contact and continued monitoring. We were closing the distance at 22 knots. Whatever it was, we'd be on top of it in about 30 minutes. I considered altering course to give it wider berth, but standing orders were to maintain course unless a collision risk was imminent. This thing was stationary, and we had room to pass port to port with at least a mile separation. I kept watching the radar. The contact remained stationary. No movement, no change in aspect. Just sitting there. At 2:35 a.m., we were 8 nautical miles out. I called the captain. Protocol required notifying him of any unusual contacts, especially at night in these waters. He answered on the second ring, alert immediately. Captains develop that ability to wake up fully functional at any hour. I described the contact. Large, stationary, no AIS, no visual confirmation yet. He said he'd come to the bridge. Captain arrived within 5 minutes, pulling on his jacket as he walked through the bridge door. He was a Norwegian master mariner with 30 years at sea, the kind of officer who'd seen everything and didn't get rattled easily. He looked at the radar display without speaking, just studying the contact. 6 miles, he said quietly, reading the range. We watched it together. The ship continued toward the contact, closing distance. 5 miles, 4 miles. Still no visual, but the radar return was getting stronger, painting a clearer picture. The object looked massive now on the screen. Definitely not a vessel underway. The profile was wrong. Too broad, too stationary. At 3 miles, the captain ordered a slight course adjustment, adding 5 degrees to port to increase our passing distance. The helmsman acknowledged and turned the wheel. Our heading changed to 280 degrees. That's when the contact disappeared. Not gradually, instantly. One moment it was on the radar display, solid and clear. The next moment it was gone. Just empty ocean on the screen where seconds before there'd been a massive return signal. The captain leaned closer to the display. Where did it go? I checked the radar settings, thinking maybe I'd accidentally changed the range or gain. Everything was correct. I looked at the backup radar display. Nothing. The contact was just gone. Could it have been a weather anomaly? I suggested. Precipitation cluster that looked solid on radar? The captain shook his head. I've seen weather phenomena. That wasn't weather. That was a hard contact. Solid return. We continued on our adjusted course, all of us on the bridge staring out into the darkness, searching for any visual sign of what we'd been tracking. Nothing. Just black ocean and the ship's running lights reflecting off low clouds. The captain stood at the chart table for a long time, not speaking. When he finally turned around, his expression had changed. He looked pale, unsettled in a way I'd never seen from him before. Log it as a radar anomaly, he said. Possible weather interference. Note the time and position. Sir, that was a hard contact. Should we report it to... Log it as an anomaly, Ethan. That's an order. There was something in his voice. Not anger, but something else. Fear, maybe. Or recognition. Like he knew what we'd just seen and didn't want to acknowledge it. He went to the radar display again, pulled up the history function that shows previous contact positions. The track history for that bearing should have shown the contact's position for the past hour. Instead, the history was blank, like the radar had never picked up anything at all. "That's impossible," I said. "We were tracking it for 20 minutes. The history should show—" "The radar malfunctioned," the captain interrupted. "Ghost contact caused by system error. It happens. Log it and move on." He walked to the bridge wing door, stepped outside into the cold Atlantic wind. I saw him standing there, gripping the railing, staring out at the ocean. He stayed there for 10 minutes before coming back inside. For the rest of my watch, he remained on the bridge. He didn't speak except to acknowledge routine reports. He just stood by the forward windows, watching the darkness, like he was expecting something to appear. At 4 a.m., the next watch officer arrived to relieve me. The captain took him aside and spoke quietly, too low for me to hear. Then he told me to come to his office after I'd been relieved. I went down one deck to the captain's office. He was sitting at his desk, looking at his computer screen. When I entered, he closed whatever he'd been reading. "Ethan, you're a good officer. I've appreciated your work on this ship." "Thank you, sir. What we saw tonight, what the radar showed us, it's not something that gets discussed. Not with other officers, not with crew, not in official logs. But we have a responsibility to report. We have a responsibility to maintain order and ensure passenger confidence." He cut me off. "The North Atlantic has always been complicated. There are things out here that don't fit into standard explanations. Every experienced master knows this. We see things, we note them privately, and we keep our ships running on schedule." He opened a drawer and pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, poured for both of us without asking. "I've been crossing this ocean for 30 years. I've seen contacts appear and disappear. I've seen phenomena that would empty every cabin on this ship if passengers knew about them. The company knows. They've always known. And the policy is clear. We don't create panic over things we can't explain. The ocean is older than human understanding. And in the middle of the Atlantic, where the water is 3 miles deep and the nearest land is 500 miles away, the rules of what's possible become suggestions rather than laws." He drank his whiskey in one swallow. "You'll be contacted by ship management within 24 hours. They'll want to debrief you about tonight. Answer their questions honestly, but follow their guidance on how the incident gets recorded. This has happened before." It wasn't a question. He nodded. "Every few crossings, someone on bridge watch sees something. Usually junior officers, sometimes lookouts. The company has protocols." The debriefing came the next afternoon. 2 men from ship management, positions I'd never heard of, offices somewhere on deck 2 that I'd never visited. They took me to a small conference room and asked me to describe everything that happened during my watch. I told them about the radar contact, its size, its stationary position, how it disappeared instantly. They took notes, asked clarifying questions, never seemed surprised by anything I said. When I finished, they had me write a formal statement. Then they showed me a revised log entry that described the incident as a radar system malfunction resulting in false contact display. "This is what will appear in the official ship's log," one of them said. "The technical team has reviewed the radar equipment and confirmed a software glitch that occasionally produces ghost contacts under certain atmospheric conditions. That's not what happened. The contact was real. The contact was a radar artifact. The system has been recalibrated. This type of occurrence is rare but documented. Your statement will be filed with the incident report, and the matter is closed." They had me sign documents acknowledging the debriefing, agreeing to the log correction, confirming that I understood company policy regarding discussion of navigational anomalies. The language was carefully constructed, never mentioning what I'd actually seen, just technical malfunctions and policy compliance. Over the next 2 days, I learned that every member of the bridge crew from that watch had been debriefed separately. The helmsman, the lookout, the captain. None of us were supposed to discuss it with each other. When I passed the captain in the corridor, he just nodded slightly. No words. We reached New York on schedule. During the turnaround, while passengers were disembarking and new ones boarding, I was called to meet with the fleet operations manager who'd flown in from company headquarters. He got straight to the point. "Ethan, you've been an exemplary officer. The company values your service. We'd like to offer you an early retirement package. Full pension benefits, despite not meeting the standard age requirement. Plus a one-time payment equivalent to 2 years' salary. The offer is contingent on your signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding all aspects of your employment, with particular emphasis on navigational incidents." I understood immediately. They were paying me to leave quietly and never talk about what happened on that bridge at 2:17 a.m. in the middle of the Atlantic. And if I decline? Then you continue your current employment under standard contract terms. However, I should mention that we're restructuring bridge officer positions and your role may be subject to reassignment or reduction. It wasn't really a choice. Accept the buyout and stay silent, or refuse and face manufactured job insecurity until they found another way to remove me. I took the money. I signed the NDA. I left the cruise line after 23 years at sea with a pension and a payoff and an agreement never to discuss what I had seen. That was 2 years ago. I live on the coast now, in a small town in Maine. I work part-time at a maritime museum, teaching kids about navigation and ship operations. I don't go back to sea. I don't even like looking at the ocean anymore. Because I know what's out there. Or I know that there's something out there that I can't explain. Something that appears on radar as a massive stationary object, then disappears like it was never there. Something that experienced captains recognize and fear and refuse to discuss. The company deleted the radar data from that night, scrubbed it from the system completely. The official log shows a minor equipment malfunction. My statement is buried in some file that nobody will ever read. The other crew members from that watch probably signed similar NDAs, took similar buyouts, and went on with their lives pretending they never saw anything unusual. But the North Atlantic remembers. And whatever we tracked for 20 minutes on that radar screen is still out there, sitting in the shipping lanes, waiting for the next ship to pass close enough to register its presence. I broke my NDA by telling you this. I'll probably face legal consequences if they identify me. I don't care anymore. Someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand that the companies operating those ships know there are things in the ocean that don't fit into neat explanations. And their response isn't to investigate or inform or protect. It's to pay people to stay quiet and rewrite the official records. If you ever take a transatlantic cruise, remember this. Somewhere in the middle of that crossing, in the darkest hours of the night, the ship might encounter something that appears on radar but shouldn't exist. And the officers on the bridge will see it, log it quietly, and never speak of it again. Because that's the protocol. That's always been the protocol. And the ocean keeps its secrets better than any non-disclosure agreement ever could. These 7 incidents were buried by cruise lines, erased from records, hidden behind NDAs and legal threats. But the people who lived through them haven't forgotten. If you've experienced something similar on a cruise ship, you're not alone and you're not crazy. The companies know more than they admit. This is Mr. Nightveil, reminding you that the ocean doesn't follow corporate policies. Stay vigilant, stay questioning, and never assume you're being told the whole truth.